We all wonder about a lot of things, and many people think that that is just a common human experience. But do those common human experiences point to greater truths? Well, we're joined by Andy Bannister to talk about that today on All Rise.
All rise, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. It's me once again, your host, Derek Caldwell, and I'm joined with the one and only Abdu Murray. There's actually other Abdu Murrays, to be honest. I lied at the beginning. Abdu, how you doing, man?
Doing good, Derek. Thanks for hosting again, as always. It's great to see you.
Yeah, and just back to that comment, by the way, on Instagram, you're the 12th Abdu Murray. So if anyone wants to follow you on Instagram, it's Abdu Murray 12. Anyway, yeah, Abdu, how you been?
Been good. It's been a busy season. We've been traveling quite a bit, and not only for personal family stuff like volleyball tournaments and whatnot, but lots of great ministry opportunities been happening. And I'm excited about today's episode. We've been looking forward to having Dr. Andy Bannister on for some time, and finally the schedule's matched up. And he's got a great book he's a part of that I cannot wait for us to have a discussion about. So I think our All Rise listeners and our viewers are really going to enjoy this particular conversation and discussion. I've known Andy for quite some time, and not only is he brilliant and fast and quick, but he's also engaging and funny, and he writes that way, by the way. So one of the beauties of his books is they're not just dry apologetics books. They're deep. They're intellectually stimulating, but they're also really personally engaging. So it's one of the reasons why I have always enjoyed speaking alongside Andy, but also reading his stuff and commending that to all of our friends as well. So I'm looking forward to today.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. One thing you didn't mention, sorry, real quick, is that you're actually very tired. You got in at 3 o'clock in the morning. Your plane kept getting delayed, and you were probably the whole time you're probably there wondering why it got delayed. And that's a very terrible segue into introducing Andy Bannister and his new book, because we're going to be talking about wondering today and sort of the times that we're in. A lot of people, it's in the news a lot. A lot of people are wondering. A lot of people that you wouldn't have expected to be wondering, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Tom Holland, some of these major figures who have been historically very either anti-religious or atheist or have had a longer journey. But now it seems like a lot of people are sort of waking up, and wonder has really done that to them. So real quick, for those who, I'm sure all of our listeners and viewers know who Andy Bannister is, but Dr. Andy Bannister holds a PhD in Islamic Studies and regularly speaks and teaches on Islam, philosophy, and atheism, among other topics, across basically globally. And he's got a lot of wonderful books on those topics. He's the director of Solas, an evangelism and training organization based with my people there in Scotland. And he's also the editor and contributor to the brand new book, Have You Ever Wondered? And here it is, Finding the Everyday Clues to Meaning and Purpose, and Spirituality. So, Andy, it's awesome to have you here, brother.
It is awesome to be on the podcast. I'm very excited to see you have a copy of one of those. They are like gold dust because the first printing is just sold out. So there's massive panic, and they're desperately trying to, first printing sold out in 9 weeks, which is amazing.
Oh, congratulations. Wow, that's fantastic news.
Rather through plans for the summer. There's some big events coming up where it's going to be featured. So the publisher is like having a mass panic of reprinting. So you've got a physical copy. That could be worth, a whole $5 on eBay.
Well, hopefully we'll make the value go up by the time this is over.
Let's see how we can do that.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you on the show, Andy, and just do some talking about our favorite topic, which is the gospel and the way it speaks to the human condition and the human longings. You've spoken numerous places. We've happened to be in the same places oftentimes where we've spoken, that I've heard you speak on these issues plenty of times. And it's so wonderful to see a work that culminates a lot of that conversation into one spot. So I'm really excited to dive into it. I do have a question for you, though. As you've been over there in the UK, your apologetics journey, or your journey into evangelism and apologetics, really started at Speaker's Corner quite some years ago. I remember you had shared the story that you, along with Jay Smith, had spent some time there and really got hammered by Muslims on some really serious questions, which got you really thinking about Islam and other things and the credibility of the faith. So my question isn't, share the apologetics journey. It's really, have you gotten down to Speaker's Corner in the past couple of years? Has that happened again? Or is it because it's still a pretty raucous place?
It is still a raucous place. It's like the free speech capital of the world. For folks who don't know where it is, it's part of Hyde Park in London. And historically, 150, 200 years old now, I think. And people go there, you can stand on a box or a ladder, or at my height, a box and a ladder, and speak about anything and get a crowd. And Muslims have traditionally used it as a platform, in recent years. So I haven't been down there myself, but funnily enough, I was on a podcast earlier today with someone who's down there every weekend, a guy who goes over the name of Bob the Builder. And Bob is amazing. He is very similar to Jay, but if possible, even quicker on his feet and younger. So there's lots of good stuff going on down there. I have not been back to Speaker's Corner. I think about 5 years since I was last there. One of the interesting things I found with Speaker's Corner, it was a great training ground. It wasn't where I wanted to stay. It wasn't ideally my style that much. So I loved it and I learned so much. But sometimes our training ground is not the ground we end up staying in.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a good segue, because one of the ways in which the book and your ministry generally has proceeded along the using apologetics is conversational and finding a common ground. And that's one of the things that I think is a good starting point to talk about this book. So, I know Derek's got a bunch of questions he wants to ask you about it. I do as well. And it's really a common ground book in this sense. So just talk to us a little bit about, why this book, why this title, and the collection
absolutely
contributed.
So the book grew out of, in one sense, the previous book. So the book that I wrote last year was called How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot, which has been the story of my life, really, trying to do this to varying degrees of success. By the way, one very serious point in that is I think folks sometimes look at the likes of us three who are, quote unquote, professional evangelists and think those guys must find it so easy. But I find having conversations with the next door neighbour as tough as most people. It's one thing to stand on a stage. You've got a reason to be there, but actually when you haven't got a reason to be there, it's tough. And in that book, I introduced the power of asking questions in evangelism. There's not a new thing to me. Others have done it, but I wanted to do it in a very accessible style. And I taught a number of questions you can use. And one of the questions I taught was the wandering question, because I noticed a lot of previous books, I think, on asking questions. The classic one is Greg Koukle's book Tactics, which is a brilliant book. Tend to assume the person you're talking to has, is against Christianity, has some objections, has some comebacks. But I don't know how it is in the USA now, but here in the UK, the majority of people you meet, Abdu, are, disinterested, apathetic, or perhaps that's negative. On the more positive side, they would be spiritual but not religious. They're interested in spiritual questions, but they've got literally zero, nil, nada Christian background. So where do you start from? And the wandering question in the Idiot book was designed to do that, really. Look for the things your friends care about and find ways to wander about those. And off the back of that, I had lots of feedback from people using that approach. But then people saying, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a resource, a book that I could give my friends that did that? So we ran a series on the Solas website where we did short blog posts and videos playing with the idea. And then 10 Publishing, who published this, approached us and went, would you guys want to do a book? And we thought, this sounds fun. Like you, I've written books. But it was quite a challenge because we wanted to write a book, as you say, that started common ground, really assumed nothing. And this book really aims to assume nothing. I've met a lot, probably like you, I've come across a lot of Christian books that are supposed to be for non-Christians, but actually they start quite far down the line. So this doesn't start even at square one. I would say it might even start at square zero or square minus 10, potentially. And then gently nudges you in towards the gospel.
Yeah. Good. That's terrific. And I think it's going to be a great kind of resource where people can share it, where it's not just does it equip you how to have conversations, which it does in fact do, but because it asks the questions that everyone actually already asks themselves. It's a great way to just give them something that they can ask themselves and have further conversations. Yeah. Friends, this is a listener and viewer supported program, whether you're listening on the podcast or you're watching this on YouTube. The only way we can do this is by the support of good friends like you who want to see this kind of content and be able to share it with other people. So if this is content you value, please not only subscribe, not only share the content, not only rate the podcast, but do consider giving a donation. You can do this in the US and Canada. You can go to our website, embracethetruth.org. There's some buttons there that help you to find ways to give to us. And the link is in the description as well. So we thank you for your support. God bless.
Yeah, it's a type of resource that, man, I wish I had early on, and probably a lot of other people. So like this would have been a really great way to sort of get into it, because sometimes for those who are even opposed to Christianity, this is a good way to get into it through just the questions that you're wondering anyway, even while rejecting traditional norms of religion. So, yeah, it's a brilliant way to kind of open up that conversation. Let's jump to a couple of the chapters too, because they are, one of the ones that really jumped out to me, Andy, was you wrote a chapter on, have you ever wondered why we have selfishness and admire altruism, which I thought was like a very fascinating question, because this is a big debate, obviously, and there's this rush for people to, especially evolutionary biologists, or at least pundits for evolutionary biology, but there's this rush to quickly sort of describe this, like, frantic sort of, we must describe where this comes from, almost in a sense to take it out of the realm of the religious and to show that you have no need for God. But you open up by talking about a Christmas Carol and how it taps into our core assumptions that meanness is wicked and charity is commendable, and that's a good point, because we never really stop to question, why do we think that, especially when you look back and maybe some cultures got away from that a little bit and we view that as wrong today. But you said deep down we all know that biology is not humanity's only story, which is fascinating in and of itself, of sort of these things you're tapping into to get people to sort of wake up to. So the question really is, has evolutionary theory, and you mentioned Dawkins in the chat.
I do name check Dawkins.
Yeah. So has it provided any viable options that might explain altruism better than theism does?
Well, that's a great question. But I'll have a tackle it in a minute. But one of the things that we work quite hard on the book to do, Derek, if you leap straight in and you make bold claims like, atheism can't explain this, only Christianity can, we don't need whatever, suddenly all kinds of barriers go up and the conversation goes in weird ways. So that was quite deliberate language to go, biology is part of our story, but it's not the only story. And I think most people instinctively know that. If you say that to someone waiting for a bus, people will go, yeah, that makes sense, which is interesting. So, yeah, I think the atheism, evolutionary biology has traditionally, I think, struggled with altruism. It's one thing to, come up with models that say, well, okay, what I do here, I'm doing it because I think I'm being generous, but it actually benefits myself. So if I do something that benefits a descendant, so if you're kind to one of your children, for example, a biologist who's reducing everything to atoms could say, well, okay, you're benefiting your genes. There's the selfish gene all the way down, as Dawkins would say. Even slightly further out, your tribe, your immediate social group, the same might apply. You might pick fleas off, Abdu, and in return he'll pick fleas off you, and to go, everything's wonderful, and then do a great podcast together. It gets a bit trickier when you start going, outside your group. So there's no beneficial action at all. So if you're walking, in your neighborhood and you see an old lady who's fallen into the river, who's no genetic relationship to you at all, whatever, and she's had her children, she's passing her DNA, so biologically her work is done, and you dive into the river to save her, it's hard to go, is that a foolish thing? Particularly if you haven't finished reproducing. Why put your selfish genes at risk for someone who can bear no help to you? And some biologists have struggled over the years. So E.O. Wilson, very famous, sort of sociobiologist, literally tries to find ways to explain, well, there's some genetic relationship there. And he even tried to work out a formula, how much if you're willing to lay your life down for a direct relative or two half cousins or something. It gets quite ridiculous. And there's a wonderful book called Darwinian Fairy Tales by the Australian philosopher David Stove. I think it's David Stove. And he just goes to town on this. He's an atheist. But his point, he said, this just shows that evolutionary biology does not explain everything about humanity. It's a lovely book, actually, Darwinian Fairy Tales, because he's not advancing creationism. It's a great book to give to a skeptical friend. But he does drive a coach and horses through the altruism piece. I think it's altruism That is hard. And you can find, atheist writers literally saying things, Derek, like there is no such thing as altruism. It's an illusion that the altruism doesn't exist. To which I just would want to say, well, they're obviously in the wrong social circle, quite frankly. Maybe if you just hang out with fellow academics on universities, it is like nature's red in tooth and claw and citations in academic journals. But for the rest of us, yeah. So I think Christianity is a better story. And by the way, if we use that language with our friends, a better story, sometimes we try and take no prisoners in apologetics. If you just go a better story, that leaves you open to going, I'm still open to evolution playing part of it. I'm not saying it's all or nothing, but I am saying it's a better story and a more compelling thing. And what we tried to do, by the way, and have you ever wondered, 28 chapters, 28 wandering questions, you build this gentle cumulative case. So altruism on its own might not convince you that perhaps the Christian faith is worth a look, but when you take this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece, it builds up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the cumulative case is such an important aspect of making any case, because right now, and I love what you're saying right now, because oftentimes in the cultural engagement, whether it's with those who are apathetic or those who are hostile or who are religious or spiritual in some sense but have sort of a godless view of that, I think of that book called Strange Rites that talks oftentimes about the way in which we've continued our spirituality and our religiosity, but we've just jettisoned all formal religious constructs from doing so. What we end up doing is having these gladiatorial matches where we have to have the one-liner that shuts them down, shuts them up, and we almost in our heads visualize the tweet that never comes or the YouTube video that never formulates. Abdu Murray owns atheist when he, and then ... and then I say something that shuts a person down. And that's just not how conversations really work. It's not how convincing somebody really works. I think it's that cumulative case where you take something we often find we care about and we want to either believe in or want to believe in, and find that common ground. It reminds me of that quote that you and I have admired long from Blaise Pascal.
I was literally going to go Blaise Pascal, but you got there first. Go for it.
Well, it's that line, men despise religion because they fear that it may be true, and the trick is to show them that religion is not contrary to reason, but worthy of reverence and respect. And I think the real meat of that quote is the next line, which is make good people wish it were true and then show them that it is.
Yes.
It's that argument, sort of an argument from desire. But what I think I like about your book is it's actually a variation of the argument from desire, and I would call it an argument from appeal. In other words, what appeals to people, and is there a legitimate appeal? And then you say, well, why does it appeal to you? Why does this question appeal to you, and that kind of thing, and finds that common ground. And then I wanted to bring up one illustration from a sci-fi movie. On this altruism thing and the calculus, so to speak, that you mentioned earlier. I didn't think of this. It's not my notes. I just thought of this as you mentioned this illustration, or E.O. Wilson's attempt to calculate and give quantifiable measures as to what altruism actually is and why someone would do it. There's a movie, I, Robot, based on the Isaac Asimov. Will Smith. It's the same title. There's a scene where Will Smith, who is playing the character who just does not like new technology, he's afraid of it, he thinks robots can't be people, et cetera, et cetera. He's talking to this robot about how he got saved from a car accident, and there was a little girl who was also drowning, and the robot saved his life, because the robot calculated that he had like a 15% higher chance of living than the little girl did. And the little girl who's 11 ended up dying. And he said a human would have known the difference and wouldn't have considered the odds and would have done it anyway. A robot made a calculation, but a human would have known better. In other words, save the little girl, or even try, even if it's a 3% chance of success over the 35-year-old man, because you know the qualitative difference on something like that. The reason I brought that up, just my views, was it takes it away from this cold. I think calculation is a good idea. I think statistics are fantastic, all this stuff, but it takes it away from this cold calculating thing and appeals to something about humanity.
Yeah, I think so. I think a couple of things, by the way, in terms of movies, because you get me started on movies, we'll be here all night. I just absolutely staggering. If I'd watched it before I wrote the book, I'd have put it in. So on altruism, we just watched One Life, which that's made. If you've seen that over in the States yet, that's the story of Nicholas Winton, who was like the British Oscar Schindler, saved hundreds of Jewish of children from Poland. I think it was before the Nazis came in 1939. That's an astonishing story. This is an ordinary guy who does that, and it's just this beautiful movie with Anthony Hopkins, an incredible British actor, playing Nicholas. And you look at that and you go, there is altruism. He's got absolutely no genetic connection. They're not his family. They're not his children. He's putting himself and others at risk, and the time and the effort and the fight that they go through, the bureaucracy to make all this happen. I'm like, okay, there is an example of, we all instinctively know, there's something so wrong with you if you're sitting there going, oh, you should just stay at home and, watch the cricket. So I think, and then the other place I'd go with this, by the way, you mentioned Blaise Pascal, which is brilliant. I love Blaise Pascal. The other place, of course, is, cheekily further back, is the New Testament. If you go to the book of Acts, in Acts 17, Paul takes a wandering approach. He wanders, Wanders, around Athens, sees all the statues and temples and pagan polytheistic paraphernalia. Should have got upset as a first century Jew. This is all nonsense, rubbish, crazy stuff. The Bible's very clear about idolatry. But he wanders down to the Areopagus, and I like to think with a cup of coffee in hand, and just says, this is interesting. I wandered around your city, and I was very impressed, actually. I'd taken some photographs, only photography won't be invented for a while yet. But anyway, it was great, and I saw all these temples, and I thought, wow, this is great. And then I saw this altar to an unknown god, and that got me wondering, chaps. What is going on there, boys? I'm paraphrasing from the Greek, and he quotes their own poets at them, so he's, had a look at what they're into, and then he goes from there. He doesn't stay there, and with this approach, you don't stay in the kind of, oh, I wonder. You start there, and then he builds the bridge across to the gospel. So I think Paul is a textbook example of how to do it. I remember when I was sort of studying that passage for the last book, I thought, of course, today people aren't physically erecting altars marked to an unknown god, but we have the equivalents, don't we, in contemporary culture of the things that people are, whether you want to go so far as saying worshipping, but certainly the things that are taking people's interest and desire and attention and, becoming central things in their lives. So we can do an Acts 17, and we can start by saying, that fascinated me. I was really intrigued why you are drawn to that. And one last thought, by the way, throw back to you. The other thing with this too, on some really contentious issues, I like this approach because it can sort of defang them slightly. So one of the chapters in the book I love, and it's great other people have contributed because I can really big it up because I wasn't involved. So Anne Whitten, my friend of mine, Anne Whitten, her chapter on, have you ever wondered why we treat sex as something sacred? If you meet someone, say from the LGBT community, rather than sort of your hackles go up or you think, how do I start a fight, or you run away, or goodness knows whatever, it's a difficult thing. Starting before you go anywhere else on, well, that's really interesting. Do you know we have something in common, that we think sex and sexuality really matter? Have you wondered why that is? Why is sexuality important? You're in a whole different conversation. That's not saying we avoid the tough stuff, but there'll come a time for that. But we don't start there necessarily.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, as we kind of look at another chapter, actually, I was thinking, Abdu, you mentioned iRobot, and that decision reminds me of that Chesterton quote of the madman is not the man who has lost his reason. The madman is the man who has lost everything except his reason. And there is this idea that I think what people are finding unsatisfying about the sort of the modernist approach to things, or the new atheist approach to things, is that it doesn't speak to the whole human, and the whole human wonders and doesn't just get to things through reason, although reason is important, but other things matter and go into that effort to discern what truth is. And there's a whole chapter, as we've already, so here will be another chance for you two to talk about movies, which is great. There is a whole chapter in there about why do we think the best stories are about good and evil? And you mentioned even telling a better story. I know that was a book, I think, by Joshua Chatraw, the Telling a Better Story, this idea of like, here is this great way of approaching people, because we are these storytelling creatures. And specifically the story that a sort of a godless universe presents is a very grim one. And you wrote this, and you said, in a godless universe, the grim truth is that good doesn't triumph. It simply doesn't. Chaos wins in the end. Suffering and death await all of us, and the story of your life is the same as everyone else's. Born, suffered, died. And that's you wrote that.
I didn't absolutely bleak day. That was before the coffee.
Yeah. I know, but it is this like because there have been, I remember when Neil deGrasse Tyson redid the Cosmos it was all about like embracing this beautiful thing that we and Stephen Fry and other atheists have kind of talked about, embracing this idea that that we're gonna die one day, and isn't that great? Because this was one of the arguments, literally, if you got to have cake every day, it wouldn't be special anymore. And I immediately objected to that. This idea of, and we see it a lot. What our favorite movies have gospel elements in them too, which kind of point to something. So what is it to both of you that you think is so important about stories to us? What does it actually tell us about truth? Sometimes more than just explaining something to someone, but showing it to them, and how can we use this, and how has it impacted even your own lives?
Gosh, there's a series of questions. Well, I'll go, and then
it's a whole matrix.
Figure out between us. Firstly, there's a whole lot of things one could say there. Let's start with storytelling creatures. That is humans to a T, isn't it? Some of the very earliest artifacts, historically, anthropologically, things like the cave paintings. You can go to those caves in France, where if I had a second coffee this afternoon, I could remember the name of. 17,000 years old, astonishingly beautiful. But there's a story element to some of what's going on there, right up to the most modern blockbusters. So human beings always tell stories. Then I think that the idea I sort of was playing with in that chapter, it's interesting when you look at the stories that last, because there are stories that come and go, stories that are here today, gone tomorrow. But the stories that really hang around tend to have this common arc of good triumphing over evil. Sometimes, very often, it looks like evil is going to win. There's the descent, isn't there? Down, 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 down you go, and then you come up the other side into triumph. And in fact, you've drawn a smiley face if you follow the narrative arc of that. It's a comedy. You described the classical understanding of what a comedy is. You've also described what Tolkien described as eucatastrophe. Catastrophe is when everything's going well and it ends up in disaster. Eucatastrophe was a word he coined to describe the other way round. And so many of our stories have that kind of quality. And, Stephen Fry and all that mob, I think what I'd say to him, to Neil deGrasse Tyson, is I'd love to see them live that out. I suspect it's one thing to say that in a YouTube video. If his granddaughter, if his daughter or granddaughter or a relative was diagnosed with cancer, I suspect Neil or Stephen would be going, fantastic, isn't this a great journey you're on? Isn't this wonderful? I'm conscious it's very easy to say things as a skeptic that you don't necessarily follow through on, or your choices don't. In fact, where I really came across that one was Peter Singer, one of the world's most well-known atheist ethicists, has argued very strongly in favor of euthanasia. Almost the sense of it should be a duty. If you're old and you have a degenerative condition, then actually you're doing a disservice. You're a waste of resources if you hang around. Well, then it turned out that his own mother, who's got dementia, I think she's deceased now, he paid vast amounts of money to put her up in a care home. He couldn't live it out. In fact, there's a Jewish philosopher, whose name I also forget, wrote a engagement with Singer, great essay called "Other People's Mothers," which I thought just nailed it. So yeah, your mother is going on a one-way trip to wherever, and but my mother gets a different pass. So I don't think that stands up. So then the question is why, as you say. Why do we tell ourselves those stories? And I think there are a couple of possibilities. One is that we're deluded. We can't cope with reality. But then that itself then raises another question. Well, what is it about the human animal that is so flipping deluded? As far as we know, squirrels don't sit around, having existential crises about the lack of acorns or whatever it is. Dolphins don't sit there reading books called The Porpoise-Driven Life. This doesn't. Why are human? So again, human uniqueness has just bubbled up somewhere else, or could it be that we do? Again, I like using that imagery of deep down, because I think that deep down is what drives our choices. That we know that there is something better going on, which is why we love those kind of stories. And also, by the way, and I'll hand to Abdu. I thought Tolkien. I'm a massive Tolkien fan. I read Lord of the Rings once a year. I think Tolkien was very much onto something with his idea that all stories, even the dystopian ones, actually are a refraction, some more clearly, some less clearly, of the one true ultimate story, that better story behind reality. Because, by the way, even dystopian fiction, you don't walk away going, that's amazing. You don't get to the end of 1984, George Orwell's novel, and go, oh, that's fantastic, Big Brother won. Oh, yes, hooray. You get to the end and you go, no, it can't end like this. So even then, even our dystopian stories, actually, our response to them tells a different story.
Well,
what do you think, Mr. Murray?
That's really interesting. I love that you brought it there, because that just raised in my mind an answer to the question that Derek brought up, and then you actually elucidated on, was why do we love these stories of good triumphing over evil? This idea, when you take stories where that doesn't happen, it sort of responds to that Neil deGrasse Tyson response, where it's like, the fact that it's fleeting, the fact that it's temporary, the fact that good doesn't always win, makes it, when good wins, to be so unique and special. But ultimately, it doesn't. It actually doesn't. In fact, ultimately, there is no such thing as this. It's just molecules in motion and a deterioration of the universe. So when you see a movie or you hear a story where good does not triumph over evil, or there's just almost a statement of the banality of something, I think of the movie Annihilation, where you're left at the end of the movie not knowing whether or not anything good happened at all or anything bad actually happened. You just don't know. There's something unsettling about that, and the fact that we're so unsettled causes us to think through why is it so woven through our lives that we just don't settle on this idea that we're okay with the universe being this sort of bleak place. I had an illustration in my head I was going to ask you to comment on as well when it comes to this a second ago, and I completely lost.
Well, let me just throw something in while you rack your brains. Very interesting. I just was hanging out on the weekend with a friend of mine here who's a comedian and an author, and Andy's just come up with a collection of short stories, and it's really interesting what he's done as a Christian. He's a Christian writer, but they're not explicitly Christian. Some are a little bit, others aren't. And he's divided the book into 3 sections, his short stories. Some are like really dark, some are sort of slightly dark, but not totally dark, and then others are more redemptive. And I was chatting to him about that, and he was saying, because it occurred to me, he said, as Christians, when we write fiction, it's very tempting to give everything twee little endings. But actually, you can use dystopian endings, because I want the reader on some of those darker stories at the start to come away quite angry and quite frustrated, because I want to raison them with the idea, well, where's that coming from? Why are you not satisfied with that ending? Why is it the fact that justice didn't happen to that character, that guy got away with it? Why does that outrage you? And I thought that's really interesting, actually, both in terms of movies and also for anyone listening to this who is an aspiring Christian writer. Don't feel the need to make everything have happy endings. You can play with your audience and go, I want you to be angry at this ending, because that, in a sense, is a point to the gospel as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting now that I remember what I was going to say. But one of the things that I find really interesting is we'll go from high art and classics and that kind of thing to a little bit more lowbrow, and we'll talk about the Marvel movies. There's the Endgame, or the one before the Endgame one, Infinity War, I think it was, where half the universe dies, and it's people you love and care about who die. And I remember reading an article on this where you all knew there was going to be some kind of return of those people. Half the universe dies. A lot of the heroes die, Spider-Man, et cetera, they all die. And because there's going to be sequels to their movies, they're coming back. And so what was interesting was there was this sense of shock and awe about who had passed away in terms of these Marvel movies. But someone wrote and said, this is actually a nod to Christian hope, because a sequel's coming. So a resurrection of some kind is coming. But you're still upset about the death will be rectified later. It's still upsetting, which sort of speaks to a human longing, or not even a longing, but a recognition, whether it's Western society has been so soaked in Christianity that we can be upset about death on this side of heaven, but recognize that there's going to be something better coming, a resurrection of sorts. And that Marvel movie idea of it's going to happen, but right now it hasn't happened. So I can be upset that my favorite character died or whatever it is. I think that speaks to something about our desire to see that redemptive nature in story, that even when things are the bleakest, they don't always end up that way, even when it seems impossible for them to be redeemed. But this goes back to a question on the nature of wonder itself. And just your comment on this is that I've often said that, one might say, well, the human capacity to wonder is an evolutionary advantageous characteristic. It causes us to create machines and various things like antiviral medications and stuff that help us to, propagate our species and dominate and outcompete our competitors, create tools, etc. But we wonder about things, it seems to me, that have nothing to do with success of the species. Like you said, squirrels are not sitting around thinking about the shortage of acorns, nor are they thinking about what happens later on, or caring about their children. They might have emotion in an animally instinctive way about it, but they don't have a deep down sense of it.
Yeah.
But chimps are not sitting around wondering what the rings of Saturn are made of, nor are they interested in mapping out the trajectories of the planets. Things that ultimately, at least in the near term, and so far haven't really resulted in any evolutionary advantage to human beings. Do you think about that? And do you think that...
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much going on there, Abdu. I mean, just a couple, maybe sort of 2-3 quick observations. One is that, again, I always want to be kind and go, I'm sympathetic to that argument. It's always good to, be sympathetic to our friends and go, make sure we understand what they're saying. So, well, of course, one question is how you measure success. I mean, what one might argue by, I think I read something once that if you want to try and pick the most successful life form on the planet, you're either looking at like algae or potentially the cockroach, the humble cockroach, because that thing, the places that they found cockroaches in nuclear reactors when they went back into Chernobyl, there were cockroaches quite happily and unaffected by things. So success means very widespread. So even the question of what does success look like, and that's interesting because humans are not happy with success just being survival and reproduction. If you took a group of teenagers and went, do you, at the end of your life, do you want to simply be able to say, I survived and I reproduced? No human being wants to. I mean, obviously teenagers want to do a bit of what goes on before reproduction, but that's a whole other discussion. But the point being is that human beings aspire for other things is the first thing. Secondly, your point about chimps got me thinking for a moment, because of course, there are some animals who do make tools, for example, but they tend to do one thing and then stick with it. The example I've used occasionally is beavers. They've been making dams for millennia. But as far as we know, never in history has two beavers been sitting by the side of the river and one looks at his mate and goes, here, Frank, we could make this thing 15% more efficient if we put in a spillway here and did it like this. Humans are always doing that. We are continually thinking and wrestling and improving and rewriting stuff, and that interests me. And then thirdly, I guess I would also say, which is a much bigger question, the technological improvement that we have done as human beings hasn't always necessarily been beneficial, has it? Which is interesting because there is something about the human creature that we have this ability when we create technology to use it for great good and great evil. That goes for everything we invent, actually, whether it's, art, we can use that to be vicious and cruel, as well as kind and majestic. And then technology, it's sobering. Take nuclear power. Right? It can power cities and it can also flatten cities. And to go, that's interesting. So is it as straightforward as everything that human beings have come up with is advantageous and therefore, Mother Nature is selected for wandering? I'm not so sure that's as easy an argument as some might think it is when you start pushing on it.
That's a really good point. I was thinking about something that happened relatively recently with the advent of AI. So I've been thinking a lot about, I don't know, you're into the tech stuff as well, and you're a developer of technology yourself, so I know that this is of interest to you. But when Jason Allen won that art contest some years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, using Midjourney instead of actually in the digital art contest, and he won it with just by using prompts instead of actually taking what a lot of digital artists will do, was take the light pen or the Apple Pencil, whatever it is, put it onto the pad and then create art with their hand. Many people accuse him of cheating. And he said at the end of it, when he was justifying his first place trophy, when he didn't actually do any mind, eye, hand kind of art, just typed some stuff in. He said, it's over. This is not going to stop. AI won, humans lost. It was like a brag, as if he had forgotten that he was not in the AI categories. Like, you used AI to do this, but you're not an artificially intelligent thing that's superior to humans. But I remember thinking, what a strange boast to brag about this thing you created, which will, if they have this romanticized view of what AI actually is, it will render us obsolete. Whether it ever will is another issue. I don't think so, but still, the specter of it doing so. So my point here is that you have someone who is bragging about the fact that AI can replace us, even on the thing that seems to make us really human. Even though there was an article that Derek sent me the other day about how human beings beat AI in a digital art contest, which was actually wonderfully affirming of our humanity. But
by the way, just as a side, I read a wonderful story the other day, which was there was a photographer who got his entry dismissed from an artificial intelligence art contest because he submitted a real picture. It looked quite AI-y. It was amazing. I mean, you look at it, you go, I could see how that you might think that was AI, but actually it wasn't. It was a real world photo. So he was making a point the other direction. It was quite funny.
That may actually be so. The gentleman who won or placed very highly in the AI contest, he then told them, by the way, I tricked you as a real photo, and they disqualified him from it. So we maybe talked about this.
He'd taken I was a flamingo with no head, because it had his flamingo head hidden, and it was a sort of pink thing on a stick.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so this is the kind of thing where it goes back to that wonder. Is a wonder always evolutionarily advantageous when we're actually, in some ways, very proud of the fact that through our wonder, we might, I'm saying might, create something that could render many people either relevant or irrelevant or obsolete or replace us or sort of even render us more machine-like while we make machines more human-like. I think your point is very well taken on this. There's so many examples where we can say, is it as obvious that wonder is an evolutionary either epiphenomenon or a advantageous thing? So I really love that a lot.
Yeah. I think the other thing too, as well, that that lay behind a lot of what we did in the book here is to go. There's some people who are going to have who are going to want to be argumentative, and there's nothing wrong with argumentative. It's great fun. The majority of people in their lived experiences are not wandering around going, well, my sense of wonder is because of evolutionary biology, but they're experiencing this, they're thinking about things, and I think the opportunity to make that connection to people, and if the bigger philosophical arguments come up, to lean into those, but not to start those. And I think, like we said at the start of this, I think what is so compelling for me with this approach is also the way, as I say, the cumulative threads come together. We've got there's a sciencey chapter in here that have you ever wondered why mathematics works? It's the most sciencey we get, and all those threads together. And it occurred to me the other day, actually, somebody pointed out we've done a reverse of the C.S. Lewis quote, because C.S. Lewis famously said, I believe in Christianity in the same way as I believe the sun has risen, by it I see everything else. But of course you could turn that around and go, here are all these really interesting things that seem to be illuminated by a light source. What is the light source? Maybe it's time to look up and see where all the different beams are heading back to.
Yeah, indeed. I think that really hits on one of the reasons why when you hear someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who is obviously extremely bright, very courageous, does not pull punches, and yet she with candor says, none of the things that I was looking for to explain the phenomenon around me or to combat the evil that's around me were naturalistic. I had to look somewhere else and look up. And it wasn't, people had chided her originally as making more of an emotional or an experiential decision on God's existence, when she says, no, that's not it. There's more to it than that. And I think with this, what your book hits on is, while she might be an example of it, you guys have hit on a number of examples of why in which that kind of a turnaround from someone who is so anti-theist can make such a compelling case. And because there is that sense of maybe we need to look up. I really love that, Andy. That's a tremendous way for us to think about your book and what you guys have done. Hey, unfortunately, time runs short. My goodness.
So have you ever wondered if we should have scheduled a longer slot?
Yeah, well, how about a part two? why don't we do that? Because I'd love to talk about not only this book, but also how to talk about Jesus without looking like an idiot. I think many people can benefit from it. And you and I have benefited from many car ride together where we start getting in so much into the weeds that we get lost and end up in the wrong.
I was going to say, I recall that week in Vancouver, we were teaching an event for a week and we got lost every night going to the same McDonald's. I remember that.
Exactly.
5 nights running. The same guys, same problem.
It's still happening. Just
For what did it's the Abdu and Andy should invest in GPS.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll try to schedule another one. That's for sure. I'd love to have this conversation and hear more about this. But it's been a real pleasure. Once again, talk about this and talk about Solas as well and what you guys are doing. So, the book is "Have You Ever Wondered?" Friends, if you have you ever wondered what book you should get next? This is the one. I'm sure this is not the first time someone has said that on an interview with Andy. But
if you can, and if not, get on the wait list.
The only thing I would say, get on the list. The only thing I would say, by the way, that's very kind of you to say that. The other thing I always appeal to people. If you buy this, I hope you do. Don't put it on your shelf with all the other Christian books. That does not belong there. Read it by all means because you want to see what you're getting into. But please, 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 give it away. We've been so encouraged by the stories we are hearing, dozens of stories now, conversations it started. So buy it. We'd love you to do that. I'd be even more excited if you then send it on, give it to a friend, a neighbor, a colleague, a family member.
Well, that is great to hear. Absolutely. And people can find out more about the Solas and the ministry you guys do where?
Best place to go is the Solas website. So I'm sure you guys could put a link, but that is if you just Google Andy Bannister and then Solas, Solas, or we are Solas-CPC. It's quite a mouthful because we used to have a longer name, .org. But search for me. I'm on all the usual social media platforms. You'll find me through Google. And then at the Solas website, hundreds, probably thousands actually now of resources and links and videos and podcasts and articles and you name it, all kinds of fun stuff and lots about the book.
Excellent.
All right. Yeah, we'll put all those links in your socials down in the description as well. And just before we leave here, Abdu, do you have any closing arguments?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard from Andy Bannister, Dr. Andy Bannister, who has sampled and not only sampled but really researched multiple different faiths and those worldviews that would express no faith or no belief in a God. And I think what you'll find in the pages of Have You Ever Wondered is a reason to ask yourself, not only is there something beyond the natural world, but who specifically might be the best answer beyond even just the religious world. It's not just a matter of have you ever wondered, but have you ever wondered, and is there an answer to who is the one who put that wonder in you? Why does that wonder exist? And what does that wonder point to? So I would definitely highly recommend going and taking a look at this book and letting it challenge you, but don't just keep it on the shelf. Do in fact share this with people of little faith, no faith, or a different faith altogether. I think they and you will benefit from the conversations that start and the journey that you'll be on. So on behalf of everybody here at Embrace the Truth, and it's my joy and pleasure to thank Andy Bannister for joining us. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, the defense rests.